Alright, Double Dragon cab. Been working on replacing the switching power supply. This is the one that was in there. It was making a whining sound. I have one of these little voltmeters hooked up to 5-volt line, and when I first powered this cabinet on with a PCB in it, it said 5.04 volts, which is great. I heard a kind of a whining. I was with my ear trying to find out if it was coming from the monitor or down lower in the cab, and it was coming from the switching power supply. And then I noticed this said 20.1, I think it was. So I panicked, I shut it off. I couldn't believe that it was actually pumping 20 volts through here. I think what it was is maybe this meter, if it gets too low of a voltage or whatever is out of range for it, it might show odd numbers. So I don't really think it pumped 20 volts into the PCB. I did hook that PCB up to my test rig, and it was playing blind because the monitor in both these cabinets are dead. So I think that the PCB is fine, and this was just kind of an out of range reading, but I didn't want to obviously use that power supply again. So it was up there, zip tied around this metal cabinet thing here. There's a metal tray that the fuse transformer, distribution block, power supply was all mounted to, and I'm assuming this is not the original power supply. I could be wrong, but it was in here with zip ties holding it down. So I just bought another replacement power supply, and it looks like there are several holes in here. It looks like I'm going to be able to use one in the back and two in the front here to get this held in place. I've got some rubber feet, so it's not the other side of this is not flush up against this metal plate, so there will be some airflow through the bottom. So yes, during the replacement I found that this was wired up between the field ground or earth ground and the common ground on the power supply. So it was looped from this field ground to that ground. And this cabinet had been working before I got it. So obviously it can work like that, but that's not how it should be. So took that off and had to wire up a field ground because there wasn't one going there. So where I've done that is field ground that mates up with the ground plug on the power cord goes into this spade connector here, quick disconnect connector on the line filter, and then there's a field ground that's going over here to this service outlet. I just added another one on this side and put a connector on it, and it will connect to this power supply. So it will have field ground going to the field ground terminal. Another thing I did under this cap here is obviously the ground 5 volts, 12 volts, and negative 5 volts. And there was only one wire for the 5-volt line coming in from the power supply to going out to the JAMA harness. So I just made another 5-volt line. So now there will be two wires coming from the power supply with 5 volts to here, and then two passing through the JAMA harness. Another thing, the connectors that you use commonly on these screw type power supplies are these, where they fit on either side of the screw and the screw holds them down. Well, obviously some terminals on this type power supply are wider than others, and so an example, this one here doesn't quite fit in between those. So what the person did who wired that up did was they just chopped one leg off. So all the wires were in there like that. Now that's probably a good enough connection, to be honest. I mean, there's quite a bit of meat on that, and they seemed like they were pushed far enough in, and they were definitely, again, it was working like that, but I don't want it to be like that. So I had these terminals, and I checked that they are the correct size for the power supply I bought. And so I cut all of these off and put these so they'll be more secure in there. And then the other thing, which for Double Dragon is something I wanted to video, because having never seen a Double Dragon, had a Double Dragon, and not seeing this in videos, and the manual for these cabinets doesn't have a wiring diagram. It just kind of says fuse, transformer, distribution block, power supply, line filter, and that's about it. It doesn't tell you what hooks up where. So the distribution block, I had never seen one like that before. So you can see there are 9 holes in 2 rows. The first 6 are numbered. So what that is, that's a distribution block that only has 6 of the terminals in each row populated. And what it is there's a male connector coming up, and then the wires use this type of quick disconnect that pushes down in that hole over the male piece, and that's what makes continuity. So you've got your hot wires and your neutral wires, and each row, everything in a row is connected. So you can see, hopefully, that they're all black with a stripe, or black whatever on the top, and they're white with different colored stripes on the bottom. Again, I couldn't find a wiring diagram for these cabinets. I have no idea how many of these wires are original or have been replaced, or if they use the same wiring in all their cabinets. The other Double Dragon behind this one, this tray is actually different. Fuse holders are on a separate metal block that screws in there. I think it also has this, so it's almost like where this line is to here long, and then it screws down so that the fuse holders are vertical, not horizontal like that. So difference in cabs, but they both have this same distribution block. And when I first got it, I'm like, how are those wires in there? Do I want to risk pulling on one, assuming that that's how they worked? So I tried to pull this one up, because this one was too short to reach the power supply I'm putting in there. I think it might have reached, but it was going to be really taut, and again, it had that end on it that I wanted to cut off and put a new connector on. And if you look at it, the gauge of wire is not the same as the rest of them. Okay, you can't tell from me just holding it there, but don't look at this white one. This white one is the one I replaced it with, but if you look at the white with green stripe, maybe you can get the idea. Pretty sure that all the ones that are original are 18 gauge, and this might be 20 gauge that somebody put in. So I pulled this out, and I used some of just a plain white 18 gauge wire and put a new connector on. And then also I have a plain black, it's thinner, but it is 18 gauge wire with a new connector. So those two replaced these two. This one I'm guessing might be original. Black with a green swirly stripe there. So So yeah, when I first was trying to pull these out, I got part way and it was taking quite a bit of pressure, and I was like, well, I don't want to break anything, so I was cleaning the holes that are left there with a Q-tip and getting a light in there and taking a picture with my camera and enlarging it, and finally I could see that number 6, those two, the number 6 and the one below it, do not have wires in them, but they do have the male connector sticking up. The other 3, the connectors are not there. They're not populated. So I don't know if that was just to save a few pennies or what. Why you would have this distribution block with 9 positions, 6 would be labeled, and the other 3 are not even wired up so you can use them. But I looked and I saw there was a terminal down there, so then I just grabbed this wire harder and was able to pull it out. And I saw that, yeah, I was right. That's what was going on. This is the what is it? The 0.250 connectors. So 0.25, and these are the ones that I got just because they were cheap, $4 for 10 at my local Ace Hardware, and I had a $5 off coupon, so they're basically free. These are 22 to 16 gauge, and it's important not to get the ones that are insulated over that metal. That was the other thing I wanted to mention about this, because if you look at the size of the hole, these just fit in there with only a little wiggle room side to side. If you try and use these disconnects that have the plastic shielding that cover up this part, it will not fit in that hole. So you want to get this type if you've got one of these cabinets with this distribution block and you're going to redo any of that wiring. So you want to make sure you get the ones that are not insulated down at the bottom. So that's it. There's the garbage parts plus the garbage power supply. This must have been a fairly high quality power supply, I'm guessing. This thing weighs a ton, especially compared to the one I just bought. And yeah, maybe I could open it up and replace capacitors and get it running again, but quite frankly, I think I'm just going to ditch it. The 5-volt adjust on this, you can see is the little red knob there to the right of the screw terminals, and it's inset, so the only way you could do that is with a screwdriver, because it was right in here, with a little tiny screwdriver, jam in there and try and twist that thing to adjust the 5 volts. So that's worse than where I'm at, although I'm still not exactly happy with how this is going to end up. This is the adjustment on this power supply, and I should be able to turn it with my fingers, if not a little screwdriver. So it's a little bit easier to access, but it is further in the back. So here you can see, obviously, that I've got this tray on the floor. It's pulled all the way out of the cabinet. Once this drawer is back in the cabinet, it's going to be touchy to be able to adjust the voltage without pulling the whole tray completely out. So I'm not quite happy with that. I would rather have had that standing up. The problem is, when that stands up, it hits the cab right here. It's just too tall. So that's kind of a bummer, but I didn't even think of that when I ordered it, that I should buy one based on height. So you can see here, this kind of foil whatever tray, which is weird because it's facing inboard. The other cabinet has the cardboard side inboard and the foil out, which I would think makes more sense because I'm assuming that this was done as an RF shield to limit any RF frequency getting out of the cabinet. But by having the foil here, I believe that's conductive, and if you put a PCB down here right on it, you might short the solder pads on the bottom of the PCB if you don't have PCB feet on it to lift it above this thing. So I think that's why this padded mail envelope is in here, is to prevent that, so you have something to put your PCB on that's not like a metallic type surface. Also, inside, this is more of the foil stuff, and this is thin MDF that's bowed over time that sits inside the cabinet and should be flat. So it shouldn't be hanging down here at all, but just due to age and the fact that there's no support other than on the two sides and the back, the thing bows. But I am going to cut this out. I probably don't need to have the shield at all, but this right here kind of flapping around, and that's where the interlock is. So if you open the drawer, the interlock there will cut the power, so when you're working on stuff it's not powered, and then if you wanted to you could pull it towards you to lock it in place to give power to the system if you wanted to test it with the drawer open. But this just kind of, this one little flap, it's just like 4 inches or so long there, and it just kind of hangs right in the flipping way. So I think I'm just going to cut just this flap off. And then my plan is probably to replace that piece of thin MDF that's in there with a thicker piece of MDF, or maybe even plywood, that goes all the way across inside, screwed down, so I can put maybe a Sega Naomi system, something that's fairly heavy with its own power supply, audio amp, and everything else in there, or maybe even a PC. I have a PC running Groovy MAME that I had in my 25-inch cabinet that I got rid of, and that thing's all set up. It just needs a cabinet now, but it's I don't know if I want to put that much weight in this cabinet, even if I replace that, looks like 1/8-inch MDF with actual like 3/4-inch plywood or MDF, just because that'd be just all that much more weight in this cab, which is probably not a good idea to have any more weight in there than you absolutely need. So not to that point yet, just kind of in the back of my mind thinking what exactly the goal was to run, be able to run everything in here that I have, CPS2 Multi, Sega Naomi system, the PC running Groovy MAME, my JAMA PCBs, just everything in here that I can. So my first steps, though, are getting the thing up and running, period. And this one did not play blind because of the power supply. So first steps, work on the power supply. Right now all I have to do is just add a couple more screws and bolts to that power supply to hold it in place, and then screw all of the power wires to it, the AC wires coming in, the hot, neutral, and field ground, and then out is the 5 volt, 12 volt, negative 5 volt, and ground. That, like I said, I kept the original cables for those. They are long enough to reach this power supply. They just needed new connectors, so they didn't have this stuff going on. So that's it for this stage. The other cabinet does play blind, I think I said before, but when I checked the main fuse on this one, it snapped internally, so the fuse holder was bad. So I took this fuse holder off of the other machine, And I do have a new fuse holder that's being shipped to replace the one in the other machine, and I got a high quality one that fits the same 1/4-inch connectors, so I won't have to do anything with the wiring in the other cab. Just screw the new fuse holder in when it arrives, and then that one will be back to playing blind. I also have a filter cap for the K7000A monitor in the other cabinet. I checked the monitors hot, the voltage regulator, the ceramic resistors, the power diodes, the fuse, everything seems good. I don't see anything on the chassis that looks like it's bad or cracked solder or anything. So the filter capacitor is really bowed on that chassis. So my hope is that it's as simple as the filter capacitor failed, and so the monitor's not getting enough voltage to fire up the high voltage. But we'll see when I replace that if that fixes it or not. And that's where I am at this point. Okay. Alright, game is running. Obviously. This is my test board. It's a Konami Devastators board. I've got the switcher hooked up now. Little modifications here. Not only did I add a second 5-volt line, there was only one, now there's two. I also added another ground wire. It had a ground wire going from the power supply to this side of the distribution block, and then on that side it has a wire that goes to light the coin lights, and then it had one wire or two wires on this side going to the PCB. So I added an extra ground wire because there's two terminals on this power supply. So one terminal takes a ground wire to the coin door light, and then the other terminal has two ground wires that go here, and then they go to the JAMA harness. So we're getting decent amount of grounds to the JAMA harness as well as 5 volts. This seems to be running okay, apart from the fact that I have no video, but that's a known issue. My monitors are not working, so fuses are working. Able to start a game by flicking the switch on the coin mech there. Adding credits just fine. Start buttons work, both start buttons, and the punch and jump buttons, which are JAMA 1 and 2. Fire in the game, and I think that's grenade or rocket launch or whatever other weapon you have. So yeah, success there. Game is playing blind. As soon as I get the fuse holder in the other cabinet, it should be in the same place, other than its power supply is not going to be a new one. It's going to be the one that's still in the machine. Speaking of, this is only held in with it's held in with a screw here that goes into the power supply case. And here I've got a nut and a nylon lock nut on the other side. So it's in there with just two screws, but this hole didn't line up to get the other screw in. And that one down there is in such a hard position to get to that I figured these two were fine. It's holding really steady. They're kitty corner. They're not both, you know, with the same bottom or top. And again, I think I said earlier, I've got a couple rubber feet on the bottom of this power supply, so it's off the metal tray here, and it's got some rubber feet, so it's off the tray there, so it is getting air through the bottom grills as well as the side grills and air out the top grill. So it's got cooling going on, and it's got new hot, neutral, and field ground lines going into this power supply. I replaced the ones that I think somebody else had replaced. So they're nice 18 gauge. And everything is wired up as it should be. So there we go.